The barrel of Tomas Yazzi's revolver was slick with sweat. He wasn't pointing it at anyone, not yet. But the weight of it in his hand was the only thing that made sense this morning. The sun hadn't climbed high enough to burn off the desert chill, yet sweat rolled down his back as if he were standing in the heart of summer. Outside the wooden chapel at the edge of Canyon del Muerto, the wind whistled through juniper branches like a warning. Tomas shifted his boots against the dry earth and stared at the church door. Inside, people waited not to celebrate but to witness. That's what they called it. Witnessing. The truth was uglier. He was about to be bound, not blessed. Silas Yazzie, his father, stood beside him. Hat low, jaw set, eyes hard as old mesquite. "You ain't marrying a woman, boy," Silas rasped, voice rough like gravel dragged across metal. "You're marrying in a land war." Tomas forced air into his lungs. "I don't love her. I don't even know her." Silas didn't flinch. "Love won't keep water running through these canyons. That creek is the last damn thing standing between this ranch and a foreclosure notice." He spat on the ground. "Marry her, secure the rights, or ride out and never set foot on Yazzie land again." The revolver felt heavier. This wasn't a choice. This was a noose with a wedding band on it. The door creaked open. Reverend Hall appeared pale under his sun hat. He gave Tomas a nod that was more pity than blessing. "It's time." Tomas holstered the gun, fixed his collar, and stepped inside. The chapel was small, maybe 30 souls inside, but the way they stared made it feel like a gallows stage. The floorboards groaned under his boots. Every pew was lined with folks who owed something to somebody. Ranchers, loan sharks, neighbors who had turned silence into survival. And at the far end, walking down the aisle with a quiet, deliberate step, came Sahni Loreto. She was not what he'd imagined. She wasn't the delicate ranch daughter he'd seen in his daydreams. She was broad-shouldered, solid, dressed in a simple cotton dress, the color of dry clay. Her black hair was braided thick down her back, and her face was neither shy nor ashamed. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like a storm that had decided to walk on two legs. Tomas's stomach tightened. The whispers began low, cutting, poisonous. Poor Tomas. Married off to the big one. Guess the Yazzie boy'll do anything for a creek. Sahni met his gaze. Not a flicker of shame. Her eyes were dark, steady, and so piercing, he felt like she was reading every thought rattling through his skull. She didn't break eye contact as she reached the altar. Reverend Hall cleared his throat. "Tomas Yazzie, Sahni Loreto. We are gathered here to join." Tomas barely heard the words. His mind spun with debts, cattle gone missing, fences falling apart, drought gnawing at the earth. His father's voice still echoed. "You're marrying in a land war." When the Reverend asked if he'd take this woman, Tomas's "I do" came out flat, hollow, like a door closing. But when Sahni spoke her vow, the chapel shifted. Her voice wasn't soft. It was clear and strong, like iron being struck. "I do," she said. But it didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like a warning. Tomas felt the ring slide heavy on his finger. She didn't look at him as they turned to face the crowd. She didn't have to. She already owned the silence. Outside, the wind was a bit colder than before. The sun burned brighter on the canyon walls, drawing long shadows toward the ranch road. The horses stamped impatiently. Tomas tugged at his gloves. Sahni adjusted the reins with the calm of someone who'd been on battlefields before, even if this one didn't have soldiers. He climbed up beside her on the wagon bench. The wooden wheels creaked forward. They rode in silence for several minutes. The only sound, the crunch of gravel beneath the wheels. Tomas could still feel the weight of 100 eyes on his back. And her silence wasn't shy. It was measured like a blade resting against a whetstone. "You're awfully quiet," he muttered. "You talk too much when you're scared," she said. The reins tightened in his hands. "I'm not scared." She looked at him then, not with a smile, with something sharper. "Yes, you are." He stared at the horizon, at the dusty ridge that led home. "You don't know a damn thing about me." "I know more than you think," she replied. "For example, I know Elias Redhawk's been selling off your cattle for 6 months. Tomas's knuckles whitened on the reins. "What did you just say?" She didn't even glance at him. "You heard me. 15 heads a month. He sells pockets the difference, and your old man lets it slide because he can't afford to lose the crew." "That's a lie." "Then why does the herd look thinner than last season?" she shot back. "Why does he ride into town every Saturday with pockets full and no one asking why? You'd know, if you were paying attention." He hated that her voice was calm. It made every word heavier. Tomas bit down hard on his anger. This woman, this stranger, was peeling open wounds he hadn't even admitted existed. She wasn't guessing. She knew. They passed through the rusted gate to Yazzie Ranch. The barn roof sagged like tired shoulders. The corral fence leaned, held together more by habit than nails. Tomas saw things he'd ignored, too busy drinking away the weight of drought and debt. Sahni climbed down from the wagon and glanced around with assessing eyes. Not judgmental. Tactical. Like someone mapping a battlefield. "Why are you really here?" Tomas demanded. She met his eyes. "Because this land isn't dying on my watch. This is my family's land. And now it's mine too." The way she said it, not boastful, just true, made Tomas's pulse quicken. He hated how calm she was, how she stood on his porch like she'd been there for years, how she saw what he'd refused to look at. The door creaked open behind them. Silas stood there, pipe in hand, watching like a man who'd already sold the ending to a story Tomas hadn't even finished reading. Sahni brushed past him without a word and stepped inside the house. Tomas remained on the porch, staring at the dirt road that disappeared toward the canyon. A hawk circled high above. The air felt too still. Nina appeared at his side barefoot, with dust on her dress and fire in her eyes. "I heard what Pa said in town," she hissed. "This isn't about a wedding, is it?" Tomas couldn't find the words. "She's not what they say," Nina whispered, glancing toward the doorway where Sahni disappeared. "I think she knows something." He finally exhaled. "Yeah," he muttered. "I think she does too." That night, the lantern light in the study burned long after the house fell quiet. Tomas leaned against the porch post, revolver on his thigh, listening to the desert breathe. Somewhere inside, Sahni was moving through his father's papers like she already owned the place. Somewhere out in the dark, trouble was waiting. She'd said it without saying it. This wasn't a marriage. This was the first move in a war. And for the first time, Tomas realized something terrifying. He wasn't sure if he was on the winning side. "You're not ready for the kind of woman I am," she'd whispered as they left the chapel. "But you'll learn. Or you'll drown." The wind swept over the porch, carrying sand and secrets with it. In the canyon beyond, a horse whinnied too far from the corral to be one of theirs. Tomas straightened in his chair. The war hadn't even begun, but it had already found their doorstep. Sahni reveals the rot inside Tomas's ranch, and Elias Redhawk's betrayal begins to unravel. The morning came hard and fast. No fog, no softness, just the sun burning straight through the cracked window panes like it had something to prove. Tomas woke to the smell of bitter coffee and paper. Not the kind of morning that greets you, the kind that throws you out of bed. Downstairs, the study door creaked open. Sahni was already up, already dressed, her braid tight down her back, thumbing through ledgers like they owed her something. Tomas stood in the hall, arms crossed, boots still unbuckled. You don't sleep, Sahni didn't look up. Not when there's rot in the walls. He bit his tongue. Every instinct told him to bark back, but she wasn't wrong. He just hated how easily she seemed to see it all. They rode out to the pasture after breakfast, just the two of them in the wagon. The morning air was dry enough to chap your lips if you talked too much. Tomas kept quiet. He didn't trust his words not to boil over. Sahni finally broke the silence. Have you ever counted your herd lately? I don't micromanage my land like it's a damn penny ledger. You should. He shot her a look. This is my ranch. It was, she said. Now it's ours. And you've got termites in your house and you're too proud to see it. He pulled the reins too hard and the horses whinnied startled. You want to say that again? She faced him now, her expression unflinching. Your hands aren't loyal. Elias Redhawk's been shaving off cattle and selling them over the Utah border. Small batches, enough to go unnoticed, but steady, organized. You don't know that, I do. How? She reached into her satchel, pulling out a folded receipt scrawled in Spanish. Because I bought one last week. He blinked. You what I paid a contact near Shiprock to follow the trail. The cow had your brand under a burn scar. Nice try covering it. But not good enough. Tomas said nothing for a moment. His jaw clenched tight enough to pop. He's been with us for years. Loyalty doesn't fill empty troughs, Sahni said coldly. And men like Elias, they stay loyal until someone offers them more. They arrived at the northern pen, where a couple dozen head of cattle milled about. Tomas climbed down and counted them, eyes narrowing. It was short. Not by much, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. He hadn't been. He's not doing this alone, Sahni added as she joined him. The foreman's just the start. Start of what your operation is bleeding from the inside. Tomas leaned against the gate, looking out at the herd. If you're right, and I'm not saying you are, why hasn't Pa said anything? He handles the finances. Because he's too deep in debt to make enemies. Fire Elias and the others might walk. And right now your father's hanging by a thread. Probably praying this marriage would fix everything. He stared at the dirt, jaw twitching. So what now? You ride in, take over. You think you can just fix this overnight? No, she said. But I can start cutting the rot before it spreads. By the time they made it back to the house, the sun was high and the heat clung like wet wool. Sahni went straight to the study. Tomas didn't follow. He needed air. Needed to breathe where she wasn't peeling layers off him with every sentence. He found Nina behind the barn, skinning apples with a dull knife barefoot dress, dusty. She looked up, squinting. Does she always like this? Like what? Like she's already read the ending and just waiting for everyone else to catch up? Tomas chuckled bitterly. Yeah, that's about right. Nina pushed a peeled slice toward him. Do you trust her? I don't know. She scares me a little, Nina admitted, but not in a bad way. Just different. Like she ain't playing the same game the rest of us are. He took the apple bit in. Sour. Not quite ripe. Maybe we need someone like that. Late that afternoon, they called Elias into the study. He walked in cocky dust still on his boots, a rolled cigarette between his teeth. You wanted me, boss? Sahni stood behind Silas's desk, the ledger open in front of her. Tomas sat off to the side, silent, watching, observing. I've been going over the cattle numbers, Sahni said evenly. Elias smirked. Always good to double-check. Ranch this size things slip. Like 23 heads sold and only 16 reported. The smile faltered. I've got names. Dates, locations, she continued. Transactions made through Cortez. Cash payments. Burned brands. Should I keep going? Thomas stood slowly. Tell me this ain't true. Elias looked from one to the other. His eyes flicked to the drawer where he knew Tomas kept the gun belt. Then back to the door. Calculating. I got kids to feed, he muttered. The ranch is going under anyway. I just took what I needed. You had a job, Sahni snapped. Now you have a choice. He sneered. You think you can walk in here, sit at a man's desk and start barking orders? You're nobody. Just a fat woman your daddy paid to unload. The silence that followed was like a wire pulled tight. Sahni didn't flinch. She reached into the drawer, calmly pulled out a small, worn journal. Don't confuse silence with surrender, she said. She began reading line by line every theft recorded in detail. Elias's face drained of color. He stepped back. I got people, he said hoarsely. You think I'm the only one? We know, Tomas said, stepping forward. But you're the first. Elias lunged for the door. Outside, Hank appeared from the shadows, rifle raised. Don't. Elsa frozen. Sahni pointed at the satchel by the desk. Return what you stole. You've got until sundown. Then you disappear. Elias looked at Tomas. You letting her run this place now? Tomas didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, as the sun bled behind the canyon walls, Sahni packed away the last of the papers. Tomas watched her from the porch, hat in hand. You came prepared, he said. I had to. He hesitated. How many more like Elias do you think we've got? She looked at him. Enough. He nodded slowly. And if they don't leave quietly. Her voice was quiet but firm. Then we stop being quiet too. Far off across the dry plain, a cluster of riders paused on the ridge, watching, waiting, and in the shadows behind them, a man with silver hair lit a cigar and said to no one in particular, They're waking up too fast. Might have to move the timeline. The next morning would bring more than heat. It would bring war. Don't confuse silence with surrender. The sun had barely broken over the sandstone ridge when Tomas heard the horses. Not theirs, he could tell the difference. These hooves struck the ground harder, meaner, like men who rode to take, not to talk. He was on the porch before his boots were even laced. Hank had already stepped out from the barn, rifle half-cocked, eyes narrowed. They're coming fast from the north trail, Hank muttered. Could be Elias, or worse. Tomas squinted toward the horizon. The air shimmered with heat already, but through the wavering distance he caught the glint of metal bits, rifles, stirrups. Not an army, but not friendly either. Inside the house, Sahni's voice was calm and steady, just loud enough to carry through the cracked window. They'll ride in with their chests out. Thieves like Elias always do. They think a loud entrance is power. She stepped into view a heartbeat later, wearing her father's old duster coat and carrying a worn leather journal tucked under her arm like it was a weapon. She looked at Tomas briefly, then passed him to the approaching riders. Her braid moved with the wind, the only thing about her that wasn't carved from stone. The men slowed as they reached the fence line. Elias Redhawk was at the front, his shirt damp with sweat, face tight with the kind of pride that cracked under pressure. He wasn't alone. Two men Tomas didn't recognize flanked him. Lean faces, cold eyes, hands never far from their holsters. You got a really funny way of saying goodbye, Tomas called out. I thought we agreed on sundown. Elias spat in the dirt. Changed my mind. Ain't no one running me off my own camp. Not your camp, Sahni said as she stepped forward. Her voice cut through the morning like steel against flint. Never was. Elias's eyes flicked to her. Ain't no woman tells me where to ride. She didn't blink. You already let me. Yesterday. The men on either side of Elias shifted uneasily, as if even they could feel something heavier at work here. Behind Tomas, Hank's boots creaked against the porch as he raised his rifle just enough to make a point. Tomas walked down the steps, slowly careful. You should have taken the deal. Elias tilted his head. Yeah, maybe. But then I got to thinking, why should I run? Why should I let some woman and a drunk son kick me off, and I've been working longer than you've been alive? You didn't work the land, Sonny said softly. You stole it piece by piece. His nostrils flared. You don't know what you're talking about. She set the journal down on the porch rail, opened it to the first page, and started to read aloud. March 3rd. Sold 14 heads to a man named Arriaga Cortez Trail. 5 unbranded 9 burned over. April 21st. 16 head to the same buyer. 15 accounted for in the books. Each word was measured. Flat. A judge handing down sentences. Elias's mouth twitched. She turned the page. June 5th. 9 heads. August 2nd. 18. October. She looked up at him. Want me to keep going? Elias's hand slid toward the gun at his hip. Hank's rifle clicked. Elsa frozen. Tomas stepped closer, voice low. You don't want to do that. Elias's men stiffened but didn't move forward. They weren't loyal, they were bought. That kind of loyalty disappears when bullets start flying. Sahni closed the journal gently and whispered almost like it was a prayer. Don't confuse silence with surrender. Then louder. We gave you a choice. Elias's jaw clenched, and for a second Tomas thought the fool might actually draw. But then his shoulders slumped, anger burning into something darker. You think you won. You ain't seen what's comin'. He looked past Tomas, past the ranch, toward the canyon beyond. You ain't ready. By midday, Elias and his 2 men were gone. They didn't take their things. They didn't need to. Men like that didn't pack up. They circled back later like coyotes after a carcass. Inside the study, Sahni laid the journal down next to a sealed leather satchel. Tomas stood behind her, still tasting the sour edge of Elias's last words. He's not done, Tomas muttered. He's part of something bigger, Sahni replied. She didn't look at him. She was unfolding something carefully from inside the satchel. Tomas frowned. What's that? She spread the map across the desk, creased yellowed at the edges, stamped with an official government seal. Tomas leaned closer. It wasn't just a land map. It was marked with bold red lines that cut through the territory like veins, the railroad survey. That's, he began. She tapped the center of the map. This is your ranch. See this red line? Yeah. That's not where the tracks are actually planned. Tomas blinked. What do you mean? They made it look like the line runs through Yazzie land. That's why Joaquin Esparza's been buying up property around here. That's why Father Ignacio arranged this marriage so fast. But the real route she dragged her finger south runs through the canyon below. Not your land. Never did. Then why, because everyone thinks it does, she cut in, and belief is cheaper to buy than truth. The weight of that hit Tomas like a cold hammer. All this fighting, this marriage. Elias's betrayal, the whispers in town. All of it, built on a lie. She folded the map again, slow and careful, and slipped it back inside the satchel. Someone wanted control of this ranch, not because they needed it, because they needed to keep others from finding out. And Elias pawns like him are useful. They stir up noise while the real players set the board. That evening, as the sun sank into the canyon rim, Tomas sat on the porch steps, elbows on his knees. The weight of it all sat heavy in his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't want a drink. He wanted a fight, but a smart one. Hank came around the corner, scratching the back of his neck. "We're low on ammo," he muttered. "And feed." "Of course we are," Tomas sighed. "Elias probably skimmed that too." Hank lowered his voice. "You think he's run into Joaquin?" Tomas nodded slowly. "Yeah. And I think Joaquin's been waiting." The wind shifted. Coyotes howled in the far distance, closer to the canyon than usual. Inside, Sahni was still working, lighting lamp after lamp, reading every line of his father's accounts like a battlefield map. She moved with the certainty of someone who'd prepared for this war long before stepping onto his land. Tomas looked toward the dark horizon. Elias was out there. Joaquin was out there. And now so was something Tomas hadn't expected. That night, long after the lamps burned low, Nina crept into the study barefoot. Sahni didn't look up, but she spoke anyway. "Couldn't sleep." "Neither could you," Nina said softly. "I heard Elias earlier. What he said. About something coming." Sahni finally looked up. Her eyes were dark, calm, but sharp. "Then we'll meet it head on. Are we going to be okay?" Sahni reached out and gently closed the ledger. Being okay isn't something you get handed. It's something you fight for. Miles away on the far edge of the desert, Elias dismounted at a campfire ringed with men wearing Esparza's colors. Joaquin sat in a wooden chair, a cigar glowing in the dark. Elias dropped to one knee, not out of respect, but survival. Joaquin smiled slowly, a snake testing its tongue. "I told you to keep them sleeping." Elias's voice cracked. "She's not what I expected. She's dangerous." Joaquin leaned forward. "Then we adjust." The fire popped, sending a burst of sparks into the black sky. Back at the ranch, Tomas stood at the window watching Sahni spread the map across Silas's old desk once more. She traced the railroad line like a general tracing battle plans. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The war had just changed shape. Tomorrow they'd have to decide whether to fight it or be swallowed whole. Don't confuse silence with surrender. This time he understood exactly what she meant. And far off, where the canyon shadows ran deep, Joaquin Esparza began to move his pieces. The next morning it was hot and strange. No wind, no bird song. Just the kind of stillness that made the back of Tomas's neck itch. He stepped out onto the porch, coffee in one hand, revolver on his hip. The canyon beyond looked the same, red stone and ancient echoes, but something about the light felt different, like the land was holding its breath. Inside, Sahni was already working, again. She hadn't slept, not really. Tomas could tell by the way she moved, precise, focused, but with the kind of weariness that clung to your bones. Nina sat across from her, cross-legged on the floor, sorting papers by color and seal. She was the one who'd come to Sahni during the night asking to help. No one had told her to. She just showed up. "I want to learn what you know," Nina had said. And Sahni, without looking up, replied, "Then learn to read the silence between lies." Now the two of them looked like generals in a war room, plotting what to do with truths no one wanted to hear. Tomas stepped inside. Elias ain't coming back. But Joaquin might. He will, Sahni said. But not until he's sure we've seen too much. Nina looked up. What if he already knows we have that quieted the room? Later that day, they rode out to the high ridge overlooking the canyon. The heat shimmered off the rock in ghost-like waves. Sahni insisted they make the trip, said she needed to see the water for herself. Creek's runnin' thin, Tomas muttered, squatting by the edge, dragging his fingers through what little flowed. Used to run strong all summer. Sahni knelt beside him, cupped the water in her hands, and let it trickle back into the earth. This is life, she said, and power, and leverage. You think this is just water, but to the men circling our land, this is gold without weight. Tomas nodded. I get that now. She glanced at him. Do you? He met her eyes. I didn't see it before. The slow theft. The land is thinning under our feet. She stood. Even shadows have roots if you dig deep enough. They weren't alone on the ridge. Nina had wandered off, curious as ever, and now came jogging back, breath short, eyes wide. There's someone in the sandstone caves. Tomas's heart dropped. Where? She pointed. The old ceremony trail, near the dead juniper. Sahni's expression shifted not from panic, but something colder. She turned without a word and mounted her horse. They rode in silence down the narrow switchbacks, dirt and gravel kicking up behind them. Tomas's hands twitched near his belt the whole way. When they reached the trailhead, Tomas signaled for silence. He motioned for Nina to stay back and drew his revolver. Sahni dismounted and pulled a small blade from her boot. Not flashy, just sharp. The three crept toward the cave's mouth, the rock walls pressing in like lungs, not fully expanded. Voices echoed from within, Spanish, rough. One deep one, snake-like. Tomas peeked around the edge. Two men. One wore Esparza's silver spur insignia. The other wore black robes. Father Ignacio Sani whispered. Her voice was ice. Tomas clenched his jaw. You sure I'd know that voice anywhere? They listened. She's already unraveling the plan, Ignacio was saying. The map wasn't supposed to fall into her hands. Then we move now, the other man snapped. Before she shows the marshal. Tomas pulled back. They're planning to strike soon. Sahni nodded. And now we know why. They slipped away before the men noticed them staying low among the brush and sandstone. Only when they were back on the trail did they stop. Tomas turned to her. You never told me Ignacio was part of this. I didn't know until now, she said. But it fits. He's the one who arranged the marriage. Said it was God's will. He scoffed. God's will, huh? God didn't write that map, she said. Men did, with greed in their hands. That evening they gathered in the barn. Only the most trusted hands remained Hank Frank Cole. Sahni unrolled the map on a hay bale and traced the route again for all to see. This is the real path. The rail won't come through Yazzie land. It'll cut 3 miles south through property still unclaimed. But only if we keep our water rights. Without water, their plans dry up. Tomas looked at the others. That means we've got a target on our backs. Frank leaned on his shotgun. So what's the move? Sahni looked up, eyes fierce. We use their lie against them. Let them keep thinking we're blind. But we will prepare. Prepare how Hank asked. Fortify the house, double patrols, ride the borders, And most of all, she said, pulling a second scroll from her satchel, we send word to the marshal. Tomas stepped forward. How closest towns 3 days of hard ride. She smiled grimly. Not if you know the desert. He studied her. You already sent it, didn't you? I did. The day Elias ran. I knew then we'd be racing the clock. Hank let out a low whistle. You play a long game. Sahni looked around the barn. It's the only game that survives out here. Later that night, Tomas sat by the fire sharpening his knife, watching the flames lick higher with every gust of wind. Sahni approached quietly and sat beside him. You did good today, she said. I followed you, he said simply. That takes more courage than leading when you're wrong. He turned the blade in his hand. What's next? She looked toward the canyon. Now we wait. He nodded. Then after a pause, you think Ignacio knows we saw him. Doesn't matter. Why not? Because now we know who the real enemy is, she said. And that's something he'll never see coming. Far away under the same stars, Father Ignacio rode into a low valley where Joaquin Esparza waited by a campfire. They heard something Joaquin said. They didn't see us. Ignacio replied, lying. Joaquin studied him for a long moment. We strike at dawn, Ignacio said. We strike before dawn. And miles away in the sandstone cliffs, Nina stood at the cave's edge, heart pounding. She had followed the wrong trail, not back to the ranch, but deeper into the rocks. And what she found hidden behind a loose wallstone made her breath catch in her throat. A stash of letters, maps, money, all marked with the seal of the Territorial Railroad Office. Nina's hands trembled as she clutched the evidence to her chest. She turned to run, not knowing she wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, a shadow moved. A match struck. A voice said, "You really shouldn't have found that, Nina. Even shadows have roots if you dig deep enough." Nina didn't remember falling. She remembered the hand that grabbed her shoulder, the voice like gravel, but after that it was just stone dust darkness. Now she lay on the cool floor of a cave, wrists bound, mouth dry, heart hammering like a war drum. Somewhere above, boots scraped rock. A man whistled. "Little wildcat," he muttered. "You made it too easy." She knew that voice. Chaco Blackhorse, Thomas's old friend. Back at the ranch, Sahni stood motionless in the middle of the study, staring at the map like it might blink first. She should have been back by now, she said. Tomas leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, chewing his bottom lip. Nina wanders. You know that. Not this long. Not after what we saw in that cave. Hank burst through the door out of breath. She ain't in the barn, ain't in the bunkhouse. No horse missing. But she left her knife by the north gate. Sahni's head turned slowly. That's near the sandstone trail. Tomas straightened. The cave. They moved fast. By the time they saddled up, the sun was already high and unforgiving. The desert gave no shade, just heat and silence. Every rock seemed to hold its own secret. At the cave, they found the entrance undisturbed, too undisturbed. Tracks, Sahni said, crouching low. Boots, 2 sets, one lighter, one heavy. She was dragged, Tomas said grimly. Sahni scanned the horizon. They're not far. She's alive. How can you be sure? She met his eyes. Because if she wasn't, they wouldn't have hidden her. They would have left her for us to find. Back at the hidden camp under a bluff near Shiprock, Chaco Blackhorse stood over Nina, tossing a flask from hand to hand. I didn't want it this way, he muttered. But sometimes the wind doesn't ask where it's blowing. Nina stared up at him, eyes blazing. Tomas trusted you. Chaco's jaw tightened. That's why I stayed out of sight. Didn't want to see the look he'll give me when he finds out I'm the reason this whole canyon's going up in smoke. Then why are you doing this? He paused. His shoulders sagged like someone who'd been carrying guilt for years. Because blood moves faster than law out here. Esparza's paying me enough to get my sister out of a mining camp down in Chihuahua. Have you ever seen what they do to girls down there? Nina stayed silent. Chaco kneeled next to her, voice low. This ain't about Tomas. This is about me surviving in a world that doesn't give second chances. Then you're helping burn it to the ground, Nina snapped. He didn't respond. By dusk, Tomas and Sahani had tracked the trail through dry washes and broken canyon teeth. They paused near a rock overhang, horses heaving. You said something earlier, Tomas said, wiping sweat from his brow. About the rail, the land, how all this ain't just about cattle. Sahani pulled a folded parchment from her coat, the one she hadn't shown him before. This one was signed not just by land surveyors, but by the Territorial Railroad Commissioner himself. This is the real map, she said. Stamped, sealed, dated. It shows the proposed route not just through the land, but through the ownership and water access for the next decade. Tomas studied it in the fading light. And we're not even on the path. Nope. Esparza doesn't know that. Ignacio either. They're betting on the wrong land. Then what's the play? She looked out toward the flatlands. They'll try to burn us out. Literally. Force us to panic, to fight blind. And then what? We give them something else to look at. Misdirection. Noise. Tomas narrowed his eyes, like what Sahni looked over at him. We draw them to Cañón del Muerto. He blinked. The ceremony site, it's sacred, empty, and no one would ever expect a trap there. Tomas raised an eyebrow. You plan on turning that place into a battlefield? No, she said, mounting her horse. I plan on turning it into their grave. Meanwhile, Chaco sat alone by the fire, sharpening his knife. Esparza's messenger hadn't arrived yet, which meant he still had time. Nina's words gnawed at him. You're helping burn it to the ground. He reached into his satchel and pulled out one of the letters he'd been paid to deliver. It bore Father Ignacio's seal. He opened it. Inside was a list of names, ranches, coordinates. At the bottom, to execute before dawn. Chaco stared into the fire. Then he made a choice. Tomas and Sahni reached the bluff just after sundown. They crouched behind a ridge watching Esparza's men setting up torches around a temporary camp. Nina was tied near a wagon guarded by 2 men. Chaco wasn't in sight. Tomas reached for his rifle. Sahni stopped him. Too exposed. We wait. Tomas clenched his teeth. She's a kid, Sahni. I know, she said, voice hard, but if we rush now, we all die. Suddenly, one of the guards near Nina turned. A blade appeared at his throat, swift and silent. The other never got a sound out. Nina scrambled to her feet, blinking in confusion, as Chaco cut her bonds. Come on, he whispered. What? No time. Let's go. From the ridge, Tomas cursed. That's Chaco. Sahni's eyes narrowed. Maybe he just bought himself a second chance. They rushed down the slope, rifles raised, timing their moves with the shouts of Esparza's men reacting to the disturbance. Gunfire rang out, but it wasn't at them. From the east, 3 riders thundered into the camp, Frank, Hank, and Cole rifles blazing, creating chaos as planned. Sahni grabbed Nina as Tomas covered them both. Chaco stood between the wagons, pistol out, firing clean and surgical. Then he turned, tossed a satchel into the fire, and yelled letters. Maps. All of it. Burned. Esparza's men screamed. One charged. Chaco dropped him with a clean shot. Then another. And another. But not before a bullet caught him in the sien. He staggered, fell to one knee. Tomas reached him seconds later. "You idiot," he growled. Chaco coughed, smiled weakly. "I didn't want her blood on my hands." "Yours ain't clean." "No," Chaco whispered. "But maybe now it's lighter." They dragged him up the ridge as the fire consumed the wagon. Behind them, Esparza's camp was in flames, the fake documents reduced to ash. But they had the real ones. Still safe. Still sealed. Back at the ranch, Sahni stitched Chaco's wound in silence. He didn't complain, didn't flinch. When it was over, he looked up at her. "I'm not asking forgiveness." "Good," she replied, "because you don't have it yet." Tomas entered, rifle slung over his shoulder. "He gave us a shot." "That's more than most men do after choosing the wrong side." Chaco winced. "You gonna tell your father?" "No," Tomas said. "I'm gonna tell the marshal." In the darkness outside, Sahni sat on the porch with Nina watching the stars flicker. "They'll come harder now," Nina whispered. "Yes," Sahni said. "But they're louder now, more desperate." And us, Sahni smiled faintly. "We're quieter and smarter." They watched the firelight fade from the horizon. Blood moves faster than law out here. But so does truth. The fire came at night. It started as a flicker on the porch, just a glow beneath the boards, and within seconds it roared up like it had been waiting all day for the wind to turn. Tomas woke to smoke in his lungs and the taste of ash on his tongue. He didn't think so. He rolled off the cot, grabbed his rifle, and stumbled into the hallway, shouting. Fire Sahni was already there, barefoot, satchel in one hand, eyes sharp. Front porch, kerosene burn. It was lit on purpose. "Everyone out," Tomas barked, grabbing Nina by the wrist as she burst from the bunk room, coughing. Flames licked up the walls, dancing along the old timber, like it remembered every dry season that had passed without rain. Hank appeared in the hallway, half-dressed, blood on his forehead. "They shot me trying to get out of the barn. We're surrounded. 5, maybe 6 riders. More coming." Sahni's eyes narrowed. They waited for the dark. "They wanted us asleep," Tomas muttered. "No," Sahni said. "They wanted us inside when it burned." Outside, gunfire cracked. Frank shouted from behind the corral. "They're circling the back." Tomas turned to Sahni. "There's a tunnel under the root cellar, right?" She nodded. "Leads to the north barn. We move. Now." As Nina darted toward the kitchen, Sahni grabbed Tomas's arm. "The documents. The map. I need it. You can't carry all that through fire." She didn't hesitate. "It's worth more than this house." Before he could argue, she vanished into the smoke. She found the ledger box where she'd hidden it behind Silas's old desk, beneath a false floorboard. Her lungs burned, eyes stinging. Flames crept across the curtains behind her. She didn't look back. She shoved the sealed envelope into her satchel, along with the official map and the black journal detailing every stolen head of cattle, every payout, every signature. Then she spotted the smaller tube on the second map, the one they didn't know she had. She grabbed it. As she turned to leave, the front wall gave way. The house groaned like it had been waiting to fall. She barely made it to the hallway before the ceiling collapsed behind her. Tomas held the cellar door open as Sahni came sprinting in, coughing soot streaking her face. He didn't ask. He just nodded. "Everyone's in. Let's go." The tunnel was low, narrow, and old. reinforced with warped beams and the smell of years gone by. Nina held a lantern at the front. Chaco walked behind her, one arm pressed to his bandaged side. Frank and Hank covered the rear, listening for footsteps above them. The fire roared behind them, the sound of their home dying. No one said a word until they emerged into the north barn, coughing, red-eyed, but alive. Tomas helped Sahni up the ladder into the hayloft, where they could see over the ridge. "Tell me you've got something we can use." She opened the satchel and pulled out the second map. Not the railroad lines, not the cattle logs. This one had names, deeds, sealed copies of private agreements between Father Ignacio Joaquin Esparza and 3 corrupt officials tied to the railroad office. Tomas stared. This is it. It's everything. But they didn't have time to celebrate. Gunfire burst through the barn wall. Everyone dropped. Tomas peeked through a broken board. Outside, riders spread across the property, torches in one hand, rifles in the other. 6, maybe 8. More in the distance. Then he saw him. Elias Redhawk, alive, armed, and pointing directly at the barn. "Damn it," Tomas hissed. "He knew we'd be here." Sani froze. "Only a few people knew about the tunnel," Silas Tomas said. "He left after the wedding, said he had business." Her voice dropped, but he wasn't part of it. Gunfire shattered the window above them. Splinters rained down. "We gotta move," Hank shouted. "There's no back door," Chaco muttered, wincing. Sahni's mind raced. "We create one." She turned to Tomas. "Cover me. Frank, give me that dynamite from the tool shed box." Frank looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You're gonna blow the barn, just a hole big enough to run through. Fire'll spread fast," Chaco warned. "It already has," Sahni said. Tomas grabbed her wrist. "Are you sure about this?" She held his gaze. "They want us scared, pinned down, but we still have the truth." He let go. 3 minutes later, the explosion ripped through the rear of the barn, shattering wood and sending smoke pouring into the night. Tomas led the charge out the back, with Nina tucked under his arm, Frank and Hank flanking them. Sahni ran beside Chaco, clutching the satchel. Gunshots followed them through the dust. A round clipped Frank's shoulder. He cursed but kept running. They made it to the dry creek bed, shallow enough to crouch in, deep enough to disappear. Above them, Elias barked orders. "Find them, the girl has the papers. Fan out," someone else shouted. "Burn everything that ain't stone." Sahni pressed her back against the embankment, breathing hard. "They're trying to wipe the slate clean. They think they can kill the truth if they burn the paper," Tomas said. "They're wrong." By dawn, the ranch was gone. Nothing left but blackened beams and scorched earth. The barn had collapsed in the night. Tomas stood on a ridge with Sani, watching the smoke drift over the land he grew up on. "My father," he said. "If he was the leak." "He may not have known what he gave up," Sahni said. "But if he did, he's part of it now." Sahni didn't answer. Below, the others were patching wounds, rationing food, checking ammo. Nina sat beside Chaco, whispering softly while he slept. She'd been the one to stop his bleeding after the escape. They weren't broken. Not yet. But the final storm was coming. Sahni turned to Tomas. "We can't run anymore." "I know. We take it to them." He nodded. "Cañon del Muerto." She unrolled the sealed government map one last time. "We draw them in and we finish this." He looked at the ashes of his family home. "You think it'll work?" "A house on fire shows you what matters most," she said, "and what's worth rebuilding." He stared at her, at the satchel. In the future, I am still barely breathing. Then he said, "Let's give them something to burn for." And behind them, the sky began to lighten. Tomorrow they would ride toward the canyon, so they would not survive. To win. The canyon was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the dangerous kind. The kind that waits, listens. Tomas crouched behind a ridge of jagged stone at the rim of Canyon del Muerto, rifle across his knees, dust in his mouth. Down below, nothing moved but the wind carving paths through the red rock like old ghosts. The others were spread out across the upper ridge, Sahni, to his left, watching the trail through binoculars. Frank and Hank posted near a narrow pass with dynamite ready. Nina tending to Chaco behind a rock outcropping, changing his bandage. Sahni lowered the glasses. No movement yet. But they'll come. Tomas shifted. And we're just supposed to wait. You've got better odds in a canyon than in open land, she replied. We choose the ground this time. He didn't argue. Not with her. Not after last night. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling crawling under his skin. Someone had told Elias about the tunnel. Someone had fed Ignacio and Esparza everything. And there were only so many people who could have known. Chaco stirred behind the rocks, wincing. Nina tightened the wrap around his side. You should be resting, she whispered. I don't sleep well when I've got bullets in me and bounty hunters sniffing my trail, he said, voice raspy. Besides, I owe y'all. Still got blood to balance. You paid some of it already, Nina said, looking at him. More than most would. He looked away. Doesn't mean I'm clean. Back near the canyon edge, Tomas moved closer to Sahni. You trust everyone with us? He asked. No, she said without hesitation. But I trust their fear. That doesn't sound like trust. It's enough for now. He studied her for a long moment. The way she stood back straight, eyes scanning like a hawk, he realized something he hadn't put words to yet. She wasn't here to survive anymore. She was here to end it. You think this works? He asked. She nodded once. If we play it right. And if we don't, sometimes the enemy you trust wears your colors. She said it so evenly, he almost didn't register the weight of it. He turned sharply. You think one of ours is feeding them? I think they know too much. About where we are. Where we run. His stomach dropped. We've got 5 men left, he said. Frank, Hank, Chaco, me and you. Nina, she added. She's a kid. She's braver than most men we've met. Still not the one giving out secrets. No, Sahni said. But one of the others might be. They both looked down toward the narrow pass where Hank stood smoking, leaning on his rifle. Tomas frowned. You think it's Hank? I think it's worth watching everyone. Afternoon light cut sharp across the canyon. The heat made the rock shimmer. That's when the riders appeared. 6 of them. Fast. From the west ridge. Sahni's eyes narrowed. That's not the main force. Scouts probing us. Tomas turned to Frank and gave the signal 3 fingers up, then a closed fist. Hold until confirmed. They waited. Heartbeats dragged. But then something unexpected happened. The scouts turned around, pulled back. Tomas exhaled. They're not ready yet. No, Sahni said. They're waiting for dark. That night, the canyon lit by firelight, and tension, Sahni gathered everyone around the map laid across a flat boulder. Here's the plan, she began. We let them come in thinking we're scattered. Tomas and I will be at the ceremonial bluff. Hank and Frank take the pass. Nina and Chaco stay back in the last line protecting the evidence. And if they send more than we expect, Frank asked. Then we bleed 'em in the rocks, Thomas said, one by one. Sahani looked over the map. We only need to hold them until dawn. Why dawn? Nina asked. Because that's when the marshal arrives, Sahni answered. If he makes it through. Later, as the others slept in shifts, Tomas sat near the cliff edge with Chaco passing a canteen between them. You were always better with horses than people, Tomas said. Chaco smirked. Still am. There was silence for a moment. Then Tomas asked low and hard. You tell Esparza about the tunnel. Chaco didn't answer at first. Just took another drink. I told Ignacio about the root cellar 2 weeks ago, he admitted. Didn't think he'd use it. Though he just wanted leverage. You didn't think much at all. I was broke, Tomas, and scared. That's not an excuse. No, Chaco said. But it's the truth. Tomas looked out across the moonlit canyon. So what now? I bleed for your side until I'm empty. If that ain't enough, then shoot me now. Tomas didn't raise his gun. He just stood up. Don't make me regret that. Chaco nodded once. Fair. Near midnight, Sahni heard something. A shuffle of boots, a whisper of cloth. She spun, pistol raised. Hank froze. Whoa there, he whispered. Just came to check the ridge. Funny, she said. That's not your post. He hesitated. Got nervous, though I saw movement. She lowered the pistol slowly. Don't stray again. He gave a nod, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. When he left, Sahni looked down at the map, then at the satchel, then toward the canyon mouth where the final battle waited. She exhaled long and slow. Something wasn't right. Dawn would come fast, Esparza would come faster, and someone somewhere was still feeding them information. Sometimes the enemy you trust wears your colors. Sahni whispered the words to herself as she watched the shadows shift. The canyon was waiting, and so was the betrayal. The first shot cracked before sunrise, a high, sharp echo that sliced the quiet wide open. Tomas jerked upright from where he'd been dozing, rifle in hand, before his boots even hit the ground. Sahni was already up, scanning the canyon floor through the scope she'd rigged onto an old Winchester. They're here, she said, voice flat. Coming in 2 waves. Tomas dropped beside her. Through the dusty dawn light, he saw the silhouettes of 10 riders weaving between boulders, moving with a practiced rhythm, no chaos, no hesitation. This ain't no hired gang, he muttered. This is a strike force. They're done playing games, Sahni said. So are we. He looked over his shoulder toward the upper ridge where Hank and Frank were positioned. No sign of them yet. He clicked the radio twice and gave a static answer. No return signal. Sahni didn't take her eye off the scope. They're not there. You sure? The only way these riders would get this far undetected is if no one was watching. Tomas cursed under his breath. Hank. Sahni finally turned to him. He didn't come to check the ridge last night. He came to confirm the map was still here. And now he's gone. No, she said, reaching into her satchel. He's worse than gone. She pulled out the map tube. Empty. Tomas stared at it like it had sucked the air out of his chest. He took the originals. Everything. The route, the seals. What we have now are copies. Tomas slammed his fist into the rock. And we told the marshal to ride here based on that evidence. Sahani nodded grimly. Which means if we don't retrieve the originals or survive to tell the truth, we lose everything. A second shot rang out. Closer. Time was up. Frank came limping up the canyon wall minutes later, blood on his leg, wild-eyed. They hit from the west. Hank's gone. Just gone. They left you alive, Sahni asked. Frank nodded. Didn't even aim to kill. Just wanted me out of the way. They wanted to make sure we saw what betrayal looks like, Tomas growled. Now they're coming to clean up. Sahni stuffed the satchel into Nina's arms. Take Chaco. Get to the Eagle Split Trail. That's the high road to Fort Esperanza. If the marshal shows, meet him there. If not, keep running. Nina clutched the bag like it was life itself. What about you? We're buying time. She shook her head. No, I'm staying. You're not, Tomas said sharply. This isn't about pride, Nina. It's about surviving the story. I'm not a child. No, Sahni said softly. But right now, you're hope. That satchel holds everything. Chaco struggled to his feet behind her. I can move. Not fast, but I can. Then go, Tomas said. Before they surround the canyon. Nina and Chaco vanished into the rocks' shadows, swallowed by morning light. Sahni turned to Tomas. It's just us now. He loaded his rifle. Always was. The first wave crested the ridge 20 minutes later. Tomas and Sahni fired from behind boulders, picking off riders one by one. Smoke filled the canyon. Rock chips flew like hornets. But there were too many. The second wave poured in from the south, men on foot this time, moving between cover like wolves. It wasn't just Esparza's men now. It was Ignacio's, too clearly marked with black sashes and polished rifles. Sahni ducked behind cover, reloading. We have 20 rounds left. Tomas wiped sweat from his brow. Make 'em count. She looked over at him. You know this isn't just a fight anymore, right? She said. This is a reckoning. He nodded. And if we fall loud. They held it until midday. Bodies littered the canyon mouth. Esparza's men burned through their patience and their numbers. But Tomas and Sahni were bleeding too. Tomas had taken a graze to the shoulder, Sahni a gash to her leg. And still they stood. Until Ignacio himself rode into the canyon calm as Sunday Mass. He dismounted, walked forward, arms out like he was giving a sermon. No need to die here, he called. You give me the map, the girl, and I swear on the church you walk away. Sahni stood. Gun, low voice, steady. The church turned its back the day you sold land for bullets. Ignacio laughed. Land is dust, but power lives forever. Then let's bury you with it. He smiled sadly. I always admired your fire, even back when your father begged me to spare your village. He never told you that, did he? Her face didn't move, but Tomas could feel the shift in her breath. He was a coward, Ignacio continued. A weak chief, that's why he died. That's why I'll live remembered. Tomas raised his rifle. Wrong canyon preacher. The shot cracked. Ignacio spun, fell to his knees, bleeding from the stomach. Sahni lowered her gun. And that's for my father. But as Ignacio gasped his last, a shadow moved from behind the rocks. Hank. His rifle leveled, pointed directly at Sahni. Thomas didn't hesitate. He dove. The gun fired once, and then Hank dropped. Sahni stood, smoke curling from her second pistol. She looked down at Hank's body. Sometimes the ones closest to you cut deepest. Tomas winced, pressing a hand to his shoulder. You good, I'm standing. Behind them the canyon echoed quiet again. Smoke hung like judgment in the air. Later that night, as the sky turned indigo, hoofbeats broke the silence. Marshal Bell rode in, flanked by 2 deputies and a dust-covered Nina. She held the satchel high like a relic. The marshal dismounted, saw the carnage, saw the blood. Then Sahni handed him the map. The real one. The one with every signature, every betrayal. His eyes scanned it, then locked with hers. You held the line. We weren't given a choice, she said. He looked around. Where's Ignacio Tomas gestured toward the canyon floor. Found his fate. The marshal nodded once. This'll go to the governor first thing. The rail will be forced to reroute. Land rights restored, and those left behind will be remembered. Sahni said nothing. She just watched the sky. Later, when they were alone, Tomas asked, "What now?" She looked at him, dust and blood smeared on her cheeks like war paint. "Now we stop surviving," she said. "We start reclaiming." And beneath their feet, the canyon whispered something old, something holy. 3 weeks had passed since the canyon ran red. The smoke had cleared. The bodies were buried, some by friends, some by the desert itself, and life stubborn as ever had begun to creep back in. Grass poked through blackened soil. Birds returned cautious and quiet. But nothing felt normal, not to Tomas. He stood alone at the edge of the old ranch where nothing remained but a half-burnt fence post and scorched earth. The land still stank faintly of ash and blood, like memories refusing to fade. Behind him, the sun dipped low, another hard, dry day giving way to colder wind. Footsteps crunched behind him. "Sani." "They're rebuilding the north barn," she said, stopping beside him. "I know," he replied. "Frank said the beams arrived this morning. He's got 6 ranch hands now. Locals. No more drifters." Tomas nodded. Smart. They stood there for a moment. The silence between them is heavier than before. She looked at him. "You haven't gone into town once." He didn't answer right away. "Can't bring yourself to walk the same streets?" she asked. He stared at the horizon. "They buried my father last week. I wasn't invited." "You still carry the guilt." He let out a breath. He was part of it. Maybe not from the start, but close enough. And I didn't stop him. "You made a choice," she said. "And when it counted, you chose right." He turned to her. "That doesn't erase the wrong." "No, son," he said. "But it gives the truth a place to stand." Down in the valley, Nina sat with Marshal Bell outside the courthouse. The map, sealed and authenticated, rested in a thick glass case inside, now part of an official investigation into Esparza and the land fraud. Bell lit a cigar and glanced at Nina over the smoke. "You planning on leaving?" he asked. She shrugged. "I thought about it. Thought maybe this was too big for someone like me. Too big. I'm not Sani. I'm not Tomas. I'm just a girl who reads fast and runs faster." He leaned forward. "You carried the truth across that canyon. You stared down men who shoot first and question never. You think the territory doesn't need more people like that?" She looked down. "I don't know what it needs." He puffed smoke toward the sky. "It needs people who don't think they're ready, because those are the ones who listen." She smiled faintly. "That speech you give all your witnesses?" "No," he said. "Just the ones I hope will stick around." At the high ridge overlooking the canyon, Tomas walked the edge of the new fence line with Chaco. The latter moved slower now, limping harder on bad days, but still sharp-eyed and hard to kill. "You ever think we'd see this?" Chaco asked, resting against a post. "Not like this," Tomas said. "Not without a war." Chaco looked around. We got the land back, but there's still poison in the soil. Tomas frowned. You mean the people? I mean what they left behind. Fear, suspicion. That stuff doesn't wash off easily. Tomas rubbed the back of his neck. We gotta dig it out, inch by inch. Chaco grinned. You finally sound like a rancher again. I ain't sure I ever was. You are now, 'cause you bled for it. They stood quiet for a moment, watching Sahni speak with a group of surveyors near the streambed. She had a map open, pointing commanding. She's building something, Chaco said. She always was. You gonna help her? Tomas didn't answer right away. His eyes followed her hands, her fire, the unspoken rhythm of someone who'd already seen the end and decided to rewrite it. Then he said, I'd follow her through hell. That night, the townsfolk gathered under lanterns strung between old wagon wheels and porch beams. It was the first community supper since the fire, the first since Ignacio fell. There was laughter, stiff and cautious at first. A fiddler played a tune nobody remembered the words to. Frank grilled jackrabbit, and Nina passed out coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Sahni stood apart near the edge of the gathering until the marshal nudged her forward. Say something, he whispered. They're looking at you now. She hesitated, then stepped up onto a crate, clearing her throat. The crowd quieted. You all know what we've lost, she began. Homes, names, trust. She let that sit a second. But what matters now is what we rebuild. Not just fences and barns, but belief. That this land can be fair. That truth can be louder than greed. She paused. That doesn't come from laws alone, or bullets. It comes from standing next to each other. Not behind, not in front. Someone in the crowd shouted, Tell it, Miss Yazzie. She smiled. We stood on that ridge because we had to. Now we stand here because we choose to. The crowd clapped, a ripple growing louder. Tomas watched her from the back, heart pounding in a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. She stepped down. He met her at the edge of the lantern light. Do you ever think about what comes next? He asked. She looked at him. Every day. Then maybe it's time we stop running from it. Later, when the crowd thinned and the music faded, they sat near the fire alone again. Land's gonna need a new deed, Sahni said. New name too, Tomas added. She raised an eyebrow. Got one in mind. He smiled. Yazzie Ridge. She considered that, then leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, Truth doesn't just survive, it plants roots. And in that moment, with the fire crackling low and the stars overhead watching in silence, it felt like those roots had finally found soil. The rain came unexpectedly. After months of cracked earth and dust storms, the sky split open like a promise finally kept. Thunder rolled over Yazzie Ridge, soft at first, then roaring as sheets of water poured down across the valley. Sahni stood in the doorway of the new barn, sleeves rolled to her elbows, soaked through, but unmoved. She watched the rain hammer the half-tilled fields. It's washing the blood away, she said. Tomas joined her, arms crossed, a small grin playing at the edge of his face, or turning it to mud. Maybe that's the point, she replied. Start over. Let the land be forgotten. He watched her for a long moment. Have you ever forgotten? No, she said. But I don't wake up afraid anymore. Inside the barn, Nina was cataloging inventory rows of seed bags, spools of barbed wire, hand tools sharpened and ready. She worked with a quiet precision, but her eyes flicked to the window every few minutes. She was waiting, not for the storm to pass, but for the letter. 3 days ago, a rider left for Fort Esperanza to deliver the certified documents, the names, and the evidence. In return, the marshal promised to send back word on the charges, who would be tried, who would be pardoned, and most importantly, who was still hiding. The names mattered, because the betrayal ran deep, and not all of it had been buried in the canyon. She turned as Chaco stepped inside, dripping coat dragging mud. "Mail's here," he said, tossing a leather satchel onto the table. Nina lunged for it, pulled it open, and unfolded the sealed parchment with shaking fingers. Then she froze. Her face changed. Chaco saw it. "What is it?" She handed it to him. The letter was short. Too short. And the list. 3 names. One crossed out Ignacio Reyes, deceased. One circled Joaquin Esparza, in custody. And one unmarked Elias Redhawk, unaccounted for. Chaco muttered, "He's still out there," Nina whispered. "They didn't even try to track him." That night, Tomas read the letter again under lantern light. Sahni sat across from him, hands clasped, brows tight. "He'll come back," she said. "I know. He's not the kind of man who disappears. Not with his pride dented. Not after what we did to his operation." Tomas nodded. "And we can't wait for him to choose the moment." Sahni tapped her fingers on the table. "We go to him." "Where?" She looked up. "To the one place no one else dares go. North of the Devil's Spine." Tomas stared at her. "That's unclaimed land." "Exactly. No law. No eyes. That's where he'll run to rebuild." Chaco stood from the far wall, rubbing his ribs. "Are you sure about this?" No, Sahni admitted. "But I'd rather fight a man in his hole than wait for him to dig one under us." The next morning they rode out early, Tomas, Sahni, Chaco, and Nina. 4 riders against the shadow of what was left undone. They crossed dry plains, turned slick from the rain, their horses slipping in red clay, the wind still laced with thunder. By nightfall they reached the edge of Devil's Spine, a jagged wall of broken stone and volcanic ash. No trail. Just sharp rock, dark pine, and the kind of silence that made men rethink their choices. "We camp here," Sahni said, dismounting. Tomas tied off his horse. "You think he's watching?" "He never stopped," she said. That night, by a low fire, Tomas sat beside Sahni, while Chaco stood first watch. "I keep thinking," Tomas said, voice low, "that maybe we were supposed to stop in that canyon. That everything after was just—" He trailed off. Sahni tilted her head. "You mean survival?" He nodded. She stared into the fire. Maybe surviving wasn't the victory. Maybe uncovering it was. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" She reached into her coat and pulled something from her pocket, a folded piece of parchment, another map, different from the railroad schematics, older, marked with tribal lines, sacred groundwater rights from before the war. Tomas leaned in. "What is that?" She met his eyes. The land they never put on paper. The history they erased. "My father hid this before he died. And you kept it secret because the truth only matters when someone's willing to protect it. There's surviving the fight, and then there's defending what comes after." Tomas sat back, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "That's what this is now," he said. "Not revenge." She nodded. "Not revenge. Legacy." By morning the clouds broke. They crossed Devil's Spine in silence, eyes sharp, guns ready. At the top of the final ridge they saw a crude encampment of tents and timber nestled into the cliffside like a tick burrowed into flesh. A single column of smoke rose into the sky. Tomas raised his spyglass. He's here. Sahani pulled her bandana over her face. Then let's end it. They moved with precision, not loud, not fast, but sure. This wasn't an ambush. It was a reckoning. Each step down the ridge was a reclaiming of power, of memory, of land lost and stolen, and finally named again. By the time the guards saw them, it was too late. Gunfire cracked through the air. Chaco took a hit to the shoulder, but didn't go down. Nina dropped a man twice her size with a single shot between the eyes. Tomas and Sahni reached the center of the camp together. Elias Redhawk stepped from his tent shirt, blood-stained pistol in hand. Didn't think you had the nerve, he sneered. Sahni aimed her rifle. You mistake survival for weakness. You mistake justice for vengeance. She didn't answer. She fired. He stumbled, dropped his gun, fell to his knees. Tomas walked to him, crouched low. You built everything on lies, he said, and still thought no one would ever come knocking. Elias spat blood. The land doesn't care who claims it. It only remembers who took it. Sani stepped forward, and now we're taking it back. That night they burned the camp. Every ledger, every stolen deed, every weapon hoarded for a war that never needed to be. And as the flames rose, Sahni laid the old tribal map on the earth. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The land had waited long enough. Tomorrow they will return to Yazzie Ridge. But tonight the rain will fall again. And this time it would fall clean. They rode home under a sky heavy with gold. The trail from Devil's Spine stretched long and quiet, the kind of quiet earned only after violence, truth, and blood have passed themselves. The wind carried no smoke now, only the distant scent of sagebrush, and maybe finally peace. Tomas adjusted in the saddle, one hand resting gently on the rifle across his thigh, the other clutching the reins. He glanced at Sani, who rode just ahead, her shoulders set, face, unreadable eyes always scanning. Feels different now, he said quietly. She didn't turn. Because it is. Behind them, Nina and Chaco followed, both worn but upright. Chaco's shoulder was stiff from the last firefight, but he never complained. Nina hadn't said much since they left the camp, the satchel pressed tightly to her side like it held something holy. Maybe it did. Back at Yazzie Ridge, the people were waiting. News had traveled faster than Hoove's word that Redhawk was dead, that Esparza had confessed under pressure from the territorial court, that the land deeds and tribal rights were being formally reviewed by the new oversight committee. For the first time in decades, the territory wasn't just a place to escape to. It was becoming a place to belong. When the four riders crested the ridge, cheers went up. Townsfolk lined the fences, hats raised, children running alongside the horses. Frank met them halfway, his limp heavier than before, but his grin as wide as the canyon. You done taken out ghosts? He asked. Sahni dismounted first. For now. You bring the papers? He asked. Nina stepped forward, opening the satchel and pulling out the tribal map, the rewritten land charter, and the stamped decree signed by the acting governor himself. Frank blinked. Well, this is real. Tomas nodded. We made it real. The next days blurred in sweat, rebuilding, and long talks under the porch lights. Sahni spent every hour she wasn't in the field, sitting with tribal elders, land agents, and the new council, making sure lines were respected, promises upheld, and stolen ground returned. Tomas oversaw the rebuilding of the corral and the fencing of the western pasture. He worked quieter now, not out of caution, but clarity. They were done surviving. Now they were structuring something permanent. But beneath the surface, not everything had settled. At night, Tomas would sit outside the new bunkhouse, a tin cup in hand, staring out across the ridgeline. Sani would sometimes join him, neither of them needing to speak. But on the third night, she broke the silence. "Something's coming," she said. He didn't flinch. "You feel it too?" She nodded. The world doesn't like when truth holds its ground. And she was right. The first sign came with a letter from Fort Esperanza, delivered by a nervous courier, hands trembling as he handed Sahni a sealed document marked with the territorial seal. She opened it slowly, read, then reread. Tomas came over, eyebrows raised. "What is it?" "They're challenging the land deed again," she said, voice flat. "A new claim, backed by an Eastern syndicate. Railroad worse. Banking families from New York. The ones who funded Ignacio and Esparza from the shadows." Tomas clenched his jaw. "Didn't even wait a month. They think we'll be tired. That we'll give in now that we're bruised. They're wrong." She folded the letter. "They're not after the land, Tomas. Not really. Then what? They're after the idea that we could win." At the next town gathering, Sahni stood before the people once more under the same strings of lanterns, in the same dirt square where she'd promised to help rebuild. But this time her voice was different, sharper, more precise. "They're coming not with guns," she said, holding up the letter, "but with paper. With loopholes. With money meant to strangle us quietly." The crowd murmured. "But we don't bend now," she continued. "We don't flinch. Because we've got more than words, we've got history. We've got a law. And we've got eyes on us now." Tomas stepped up beside her, holding a copy of the original tribal boundary map. "We show them this isn't just our fight. It's every rancher, every tribe, every settler who worked this land honestly. They take it from us, they take it from everyone." Chaco raised his bandaged arm. "Then let's give them one hell of a defense." Cheers rang out, not wild but steady, determined, the kind that came from people who knew what it cost to stand their ground. That night, Sahni met with Tomas on the porch. She pulled out the latest document, an order to appear in Santa Fe within the month for a federal hearing. "We leave in a week," she said. "We?" Tomas asked. "I'm not going without you." He looked at her, at all the wounds she carried, at all the strength she refused to put down. "You think they'll let us speak, they'll try not to, but we'll make 'em listen." He smiled. "Are you sure you're not tired?" he asked. "I am," she admitted. "But rest is earned, justice is built." She handed him the sealed map packet. "This goes with us." He held it carefully and said, "Then let's pack the truth." As they prepared for the journey, the ranch didn't stop. Nina took over day-to-day operations. Chaco drilled the younger hands in how to spot legal loopholes and set up defenses. Frank began sketching plans for a proper courthouse to be built in town, something permanent, something the land had never had. But no one doubted that the fight wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The night before departure, Tomas walked to the edge of the ridge, the same spot where the old house used to stand. Sahni joined him. No words at first. Then she whispered, "Some battles are fought with guns, others with paper. But the hardest are the ones where silence is the weapon." He nodded. "They want us quiet," he said. "We speak louder." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The stars above seemed brighter that night. Or maybe it was just the clarity that came from purpose. In the morning they would ride again, not to fight with bullets, but to carve the next chapter in ink and conviction. And this time the whole territory would be watching. The courthouse in Santa Fe was nothing like the land they'd fought for. Marble columns, polished floors, oil lamps flickering on high walls trimmed in gold leaf. Sahni stood beneath the arched ceiling boots, caked with dust hair, tied-back papers clutched in one hand, dignity in the other. Tomas stood beside her in a plain shirt and worn hat, freshly cleaned but unpolished. They didn't look like people meant to be in this room, and that was the point. The chamber was full of men in pressed suits and ribboned badges. Lawyers spoke in smooth tones. Bankers wore smiles like daggers. Representatives from Eastern syndicates filed claims with clean fingernails and colder hearts. None of them had ever touched the dirt of Yazzie Ridge. None of them had bled for it. But Sahni had. And when they called her name to testify, she walked to the front of the chamber with the same steady steps she had taken through gunfire, betrayal, and the firelight of too many lost nights. She placed the map on the table, unrolling it carefully. This land, she began, voice firm, is not just acreage, not a commodity to be carved into pieces and sold to the highest bidder. It is a memory. It is language. It is a grave and seed scar and home. A few in the room shifted. Some eyes rolled, but most listened. Before the deeds, before the signatures and ink, she continued. There were boundaries written in rivers, in trails, in the stories our elders passed down. You erased those names, but they are not gone. She looked toward the panel. You want to know who owns the land? Ask the people who stayed when it caught fire. She stepped back. Silence filled the hall, not because she had shouted, but because she hadn't needed to. Tomas didn't speak. He just placed the written testimonies of Nina Chaco and Frank on the table. Photographs, witness records, deeds recovered from Ignacio's ruins. He didn't need to say a word, because her words had become his. They waited for hours after the hearing, pacing the stone courtyard under gray skies. Pigeons gathered on the statue of the first governor, long dead, hand raised as if still commanding something none of them could name. Chaco leaned on his cane nearby. Nina sipped bitter coffee from a tin mug, hands trembling less than they had last week. And then the doors opened. A clerk stepped out. He looked at Sahni first. Full recognition of tribal boundary lines. Deeds restored. Syndicate claims dismissed under fraudulent acquisition. He handed her a sealed letter. Signed. Stamped. Official. Tomas exhaled slow. They didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They stood still, heads high, as if they already knew this moment belonged to them, because it always had. 3 months later, Yazzie Ridge was no longer just a name carved into a gate. It was a registered township, with its own elected council, half tribal, half settler. A new schoolhouse was being built. The irrigation ditches had been repaired, trade routes reopened. But more importantly, the truth lived there now. Not the shiny kind made for newspapers, but the kind buried deep in the bones of the land. The kind that says, you tried to erase us. We're still here. At sunset, Sahni walked the trail that curved along the ridgeline, Tomas beside her. The wind moved gently, like it had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. Nina waved from the porch of the new town hall, where she had just posted the week's notices. Chaco was teaching 3 young ranchers how to break a horse without breaking the spirit. Farther out, flags fluttered tribal and town side by side. Sahni stopped near the cedar tree at the edge of the ridge. There's something I've been thinking, she said. Tomas tilted his head. We always talked about protecting the land, she said. But maybe it was never just about the land. He looked at her, then what was it? She turned to him. It was about protecting the kind of world we want to hand over when we're gone. He nodded slowly. They stood in silence as the sky deepened to orange, and then indigo, the stars beginning to blink to life. The next morning, Sahni found a letter in her mailbox. No sender, just a folded note. She opened it on the porch. You won your land, but the world's still watching. Don't stop, don't soften. We'll be waiting for you in every courtroom that tries to silence us again. An old friend you never met. She folded it and tucked it into her coat. The fight would never be over, but neither would their will to keep showing up. On the edge of Yazzie Ridge, a new plaque had been placed, carved by hand, set in stone. It read, "Here stood those who chose justice over silence, memory over money, and each other over fear. They did not ask permission. They simply returned." And beneath it, one final line: truth endures when people decide it's worth bleeding for. The land never forgot them, and now it never would.